Okay, today what we're going to do is we're going to do part 2 of 9-4, and we're going to look at something called greatest common factor. That's all we're going to do on the section today. In fact, you're going to see it's 9-4, and we are going to do part B. Last week we did part A. So when we're looking at greatest common factor, what we're going to do, you've done this before in like 7th and 8th grade, is we're going to look at factors. We're going to be breaking things down. So first of all, you're going to notice that with this polynomial, I cut where there's a plus sign and there's 2 terms. There's 2 terms in this. So what we're going to do on this is I'm going to take the first term, which is 16x, and I'm going to put an equal sign. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the other term, which is 40y, and then I'm going to put an equal sign. What I'm going to do with this now is I'm going to break those numbers down into prime numbers. Now, if you don't remember what a prime number is where I break down the number so far that only one in itself can go into it. So, for example, I'm going to take the number 16 and I'm going to use a factor tree. So I'm going to break 16 down into, and you got to think about ways of coming up with 16. I could go 2 and 8, I could do 4 and 4. There's several ways of doing this. Let's say, for example, I do 2 and 8. Okay? Now, of those 2, which one is prime? Well, if I look at this, 2 is prime, so I'm going to circle it. And I'm going to ask you to circle your primes when you do these problems. 8 is not prime, so I'm going to break it down into 2 and 4, and I'm going to circle my 2. And then I'm going to break down the 4 into 2 and 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. Now I have broken it down into all those prime numbers, and I'm going to list them. So I'm going to go 16 equals 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, because there's 4 2's that I circled. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you're also going to notice that I have an x behind it, so it's going to be times x. So that's how I break down 16. Now you're going to notice that I have 40, which is the second term. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to write down 40. I'm going to break it down into, I don't know, there's several different ways. Let's do 4 and 10. And you're going to notice that 4 times 10 is 40, but neither of them is prime. So now what I got to do is I got to break down the 4, and I'm going to break it down into 2 times 2. And you're going to notice that both of those are prime because only 1 and 2 can go into it. Then what I'm going to do is break down my 10 into 2 and 5. And I'm going to circle it because they are both prime. Now, if you have problems breaking these down, use your calculator. That'll help you break down, like, how do I get 40? There's several different ways. You could do 8 and 5, because 8 times 5 is 40. You could go 2 times 20. There's several different ways, but when you get done, you're going to notice that you're going to have the same 2 times 2 times 2 times 5, and that equals 40. Okay? So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to list my 2 times 2 times 2 times 5, and then you're going to notice I have a y on the end. Another thing that you're going to do, and I'm going to ask you to do, is make sure that the 2's come first and then the 5, so put them in order, because it's going to make it a lot easier for you when you do greatest common factor. Okay, so after doing the factor trees, what we're going to do is we're going to go greatest common factor equals, and we're going to circle them. Now this is really important. It's what they have in common. So first of all, I'm going to circle the first set of 2's. And because I've circled the first set of 2's, I'm going to write down 1, 2. Because again, I'm going to write down what number is there in common. Now I'm going to circle another set of 2's. And so right away, I'm going to write down the 2. Now I'm going to circle another pair of 2's. And I'm going to write it down. And then you'll notice there's nothing else common. In the 16, there's a 2 and an x. In the 40, there's a 5 and a y. And there's nothing in common. So on this problem then, my greatest common factor is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. So 8 is my greatest common factor. All right, let's move on to the next problem. And you're going to notice that the first term that we're going to look at is 6x squared. And then the second term that we're going to look at is 30x cubed. So I'm going to write those down. I've got 6x squared equals, and then I'm going to do my 30x cubed equals. All right, so now I'm going to take my 6. 6 is not prime. I'm going to go off to the side. I'm going to go 6, and I'm going to go 2 and 3, because 2 times, I'm going to write the 3 better. 2 times 3 is 6. So I'm going to write 2 times 3, and you're going to notice that I have an x squared, okay? Because I have this x squared right here, there's 2 x's there. So I'm going to go x, oops, I'm going to go x times x. If it was x cubed like the next one, there would be 3 x's. If it was x to the 4th, there'd be 4 x's, and so forth. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the 30. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to write my 30. And now I need to decide, how do I break this down? Well, one way is 3 times 10. Circle my 3 because 3 is prime. Break down my 10 into 2 and 5. They're both prime. So now when I come over here and I list them, I'm going to list the 2 first, then the 3, then the 5. And the reason why I do that is it makes it a little bit easier when I'm actually circling my numbers. All right, and then I have x to the 3rd power, so I'm going to go x times x times x. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to list my greatest common factor. So what do they have in common? Well, I've got a 2, so I'm going to write down the 2. Then I have a 3, so I'm going to write down the 3. Now I'm going to go to my x's. I got some x's in common. So I got one set of x, and I have another set of x. So my greatest common factor then is 2 times 3, which is 6, and then x times x is x squared. Okay, so that are the notes for today. Your assignment will be listed on the board. If you have questions, make sure that you ask someone, and we will talk more tomorrow.